5 friends, lost and alone,
Mother, where are you?
took an incredible journey
You want to go with me? Yeah.
through a land of wonder and a land of danger.
He doesn't hate any of you.
Okay, another clip from The Land Before Time. So I'm talking to Stu Krieger. He's a writer, producer, novelist, everything. I mean, just an incredible, as you said, 50 years, which is amazing. So let's go back to that, because one of the questions I really wanted to talk to you about was, now and I remember Kinfolk, I completely forgot about it. The other script I loved of yours, was it called something in Maine? It was where you had all the old TV stars in a kind of a murder trial, right?
Yes, Maple and Elm.
Maple and Elm. And that was a really hot script for a while that never got made, that should have gotten made.
Yep. That was my first true heartbreak in show business, because Amy Heckerling was attached to direct.
Yes.
Stuart Kornfeld was attached to produce. And ultimately, we'll leave some names out of it, but ultimately ended up blowing up because of a feud between the head of the studio and the executive producer on it. And their feud blew it up. It had nothing to do with the project. It had nothing to do with the quality of anything. And that was kind of my first big.
That's all it takes. It's just something like that. Or a new executive who just comes in and wipes out everything. That was such a great idea. So let's go back to Land Before Time. And so you've suddenly find, and I loved Amazing Stories. I think those are still out there. I did one as an actor, the one that Burt Reynolds directed, which was really cool. And Dom DeLuise and Lonnie Anderson were in. That was really cool to work with Burt Reynolds. So that leads me to my next question, which was, you suddenly find yourself working with Steven Spielberg. Was that, I guess it had to be intimidating, but was it also fun?
Yeah. There's actually a great story about the first time we actually met, which was, as I mentioned, they decided for the second season, rather than have a single story editor, they were going to put together a story panel to go over all the scripts and review them and decide who was going to rewrite what.
Right.
So first thing was, I got a summons from Frank Marshall and Kathy Kennedy, who were running Amblin, and they said, we're going to be at MGM. Come meet us here. We have something we want to talk to you about. So I didn't know what I was walking into. First of all, I go to meet them, and they are on the soundstage where John Williams is conducting the LA Philharmonic, recording the score of The Color Purple. So I got to sit there for a while and watch all that happen. Then I had lunch with Frank and Kathy, and they said, for the second season of Amazing Stories, we're putting together a panel, and it's Jay Cox from Time Magazine, Menno Meyjes, who wrote The Color Purple, Richard Matheson, who worked on the original Twilight Zone all the way through, Bob Zemeckis, Bob Gale, a couple other names, and we'd like you to be a part of it. And I said, are you sure? Because like these people you just mentioned, and like, I'm not sure how this lines up. And they said, no, yeah, but Steven loves what you've been doing so far. So I still have not met him in person. We have the first day of this story panel. It's at Amblin in their beautiful conference room. Everybody files in and sits down. Zemeckis and Gale are there. Everybody's talking to each other. I'm sitting by myself because I don't know any of these people yet, and except Frank and Kathy. Everybody's seated, and Steven comes in and he sits at the head of the table.
But let me interrupt for 1 second. You're not friends with any of these people.
I had not met most of them before that.
Right. Oh my God.
So I'm sitting at this big, intimidating conference table in the Amblin conference room. Steven comes in, he sits at the head of the table. He's got a stack of scripts in front of him, and he just starts talking. And I'm thinking,
are you introduced to him?
No, this is the of it. So I'm thinking at some point he's going to look up and go, I'm sorry, who the F are you? Yeah, totally. And I can feel my face is getting red, my heart's kind of pounding, and he just starts talking scripts, and he's going, this one's in fairly good shape, but it needs a polish. Zemeckis, I think this is your wheelhouse. You take this. And he's like throwing scripts down the table, and the longer it's going, the more I can feel my pits getting wet and the whole thing's happening. And then like, I think easily 45 minutes or an hour in, he's looking at a script and he goes, to me, this seems like a perfect Stu Krieger script. And he looks up and he goes, you want to take a crack at it? And I'm like,
really?
No. Yeah. And again, he just like filed it down the table. And
I would have fainted.
Yeah. Finally, we took a lunch break and I could go over and say, Steven, I know we haven't properly met in person. Thank you so much for including me. But that was one of the hairiest hours of my entire life.
Oh my gosh. That's such a great story.
Yeah.
Because getting introduced, it's not like, again, I think I've told the story before where I was in the movie Blind Date and nobody would introduce me to Bruce Willis, and Bruce Willis or Kim Basinger didn't introduce themselves to me.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Bruce Willis is pounding me. The part was he's covering me with chopped liver, but he's still not introducing himself to me.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, except the writer, which is you don't jump up and say, "Hey, before we get started, everyone, I'm Stu Krieger." Like, no. You shut up and let somebody else or they introduce themselves.
Exactly, 100%. So that was our first formal meeting. But the thing, though, I'll say about that experience, like I said, that led to Land Before Time was Stephen was always the most decent, normal, grounded, Hamish guy.
Right.
And the only one in those story meetings that would take him on was Zemeckis. They would go toe to toe sometimes.
I can absolutely see that.
Yeah.
No, Bob, not dropping names, but knowing him a little bit, I can absolutely see that.
Yeah, and everybody else was a little bit more deferential, but still, he would always be very open to the best idea in the room. It wasn't, it had to be me. And then over the years, when I would run into him, or we ended up working on 4 projects together, but he was always, "How are you? How's the family? How are the kids? What's up?" I mean, he was just a really lovely guy to work with. George was much more intimidating.
That's what I was going to say. Now you're working with Spielberg, and then all of a sudden, George Lucas walks in the room. Not that room, but you know what I mean. Now you're dealing with George Lucas too.
Yeah, and he was notoriously shy and kind of socially awkward to begin with. So I had been forewarned. But then again, with the awkwardness of the way things work, is most of the time that we were doing Land Before Time, he was up at Skywalker. And so he was like Charlie from Charlie's Angels. There would be a squawk box in the middle of the table.
Right.
And there'd be, it was Don Bluth who directed, and John Pomeroy, his producer, and Frank and Kathy and Stephen and I all at the table. And then occasionally George would go, "I have an idea." So for 2 years, I didn't
never met him.
The premiere. No, I finally met him at the premiere, which they did at the Natural History Museum downtown, among the dinosaur exhibit. That's where they had the premiere party.
Now, at that point, did you introduce yourself? Or
I had to. That was
it
was never going to happen.
The movie's done at this point.
Yeah.
You wrote it.
Yeah.
So at that point, you can approach him.
Yeah, and he was still a little bit awkward, but it was all good.
Yeah, but that's just a shyness that I'm sure he has that, that's very contagious.
Yeah,
so let me ask you this about, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I was going to say, because it's the other part of the question you asked is, one of the things that happened when I was offered the movie is Deborah Newmeyer, who was the head of development at Amblin at the time, said to me while I was working on Amazing Stories, "Stephen and I were talking the other night. We think you've become an even better writer since you've become a dad. And they've always had, he and George have had this idea for an animated dinosaur movie they want to do. Would you like to write it for them?"
Wow.
And as I say to my students, when you get asked that question, you say yes.
Yes.
You don't say, "How much am I being paid? How long do I have to write it?" You say yes.
Yes. Unbelievable. So Land Before Time, that I know you've had this experience, and I have it a little bit being a voice on the Brave Little Toaster, but I know that there are people whose childhoods changed because of the Land Before Time, like they had a religious experience. And I know you've been approached and told that.
Yes.
And I'm sure you're asked to sign things or I don't know if you ever go to those things, but I'm guessing if you went to autograph shows, you'd have a line because of Land Before Time.
Well, here's the best way I can equate that is I have had studiously avoided social media at all costs in any form for years and years and years.
Right.
And when I finished writing Raft and a publisher approached me about wanting to get involved in it, they said, "We really feel like the kids who grew up on your movies are now the young adult audience for this book, but we have to have a way to reach them. Would you consider social media?" And I said, because I'm a professor, I've always avoided it. I don't want to get into that. You friended him, you didn't friend me thing. And they said, there's a way you can curate your career without curating your personal life. So what I ended up doing was hiring 2 grad students that I was paying to run it for me. They would say, "Dude, we need a video of you doing this or answering this question or that question." And I just did what I was told.
Right.
But we put up a video very early on TikTok about why Sarah's named Sarah when everybody else has a dinosaur name.
Yeah.
And I, in my snarky way, said, hey, you dumbasses, pay attention. It's CERA because she's a triceratops. It's not, in a day and a half, 2.8 million views.
Oh my God.
Of everybody of like, you just blew my mind. Either the camps were either you blew my mind or everybody like, no shit, I knew that. Did you ever, so that was but that was the, kind of a really measurable way for me to say 2.8 million people responded to this post about Land Before Time.
In a short amount of time.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. That is so great. Okay, we're going to take our second break. I'm talking to writer Stu Krieger. He's got 2 books out that I want to promote. One is his new book, The Raft, which we're going to talk about on the other side of this. His previous book, The One Cigarette. They're both available on Amazon, but written so many great things that you can still watch. They're all out there. And we'll take a break. You're listening to It's Radio with TV's Tim Stack.